The Orville station floated like a broken crown above a dying moon, its metal spires flickering with failing light. Inside, the corridors pulsed with life, alien voices in every pitch, languages that twisted the air like smoke, and 1,000 smells that clung to your skin long after you left. Somewhere in the chaos of that orbiting world, Kaelen Varen walked alone. He was not a hero, not an outlaw, just a man with a scanner on his wrist, a worn journal in his hand, and too many questions in his mind. His boots made soft echoes as he moved through the lower decks, past stalls filled with glowing trinkets, teeth in jars, and vendors who smiled without mouths. The market was alive, the kind of alive that made your spine itch. Kaelen moved slowly, eyes scanning. He was searching for something he could not name. He told himself it was curiosity. That was easier than admitting the truth, that he was lonely, and that loneliness had grown teeth. A shimmer caught his eye. It was a stall, small, set back between two larger shops selling fireglass and bone wire. This one had no sign, no seller shouting prices. Just a single low table, and on it, a bowl filled with deep purple fruits. They pulsed faintly, like something sleeping. Veins moved across their skins in slow waves, and one of them, he swore, took a breath. He stepped closer, scanner raised. Then a voice. It was soft. Not loud enough to startle, but it cut through every sound around him. It tastes like Aurelian Midia. Kaelen turned. She was standing just behind him, not human, not fully. Her skin had a pale blue shimmer, as if it reflected a sky no one could see. Her eyes were silver, large and ancient, and her hair floated slightly around her shoulders like she lived underwater. She wore simple robes, and yet something about her presence made the crowd seem farther away, like time bent slightly around her. "You have never tried one?" she asked. Kaelen blinked. "Aurelian what?" "Midia," she said again, smiling gently. "Very rare, very old, very misunderstood." He looked back at the fruit, then at her. Something tightened in his chest. "Is it safe?" he asked. She tilted her head. "That depends. Do you believe in first contact of the soul?" Her words meant nothing, and yet they made something inside him shift. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone watching," she whispered, "and waiting." Before he could say more, she stepped forward, picked up one of the fruits with both hands, and offered it to him. "Take it. One bite. Just one." Kaelen hesitated. Around them, a few aliens had stopped walking. Some looked away when he noticed. Others did not hide their stares. "What happens if I eat it?" he asked. "You will never taste anything the same again," she said. Her smile was kind and sad. He swallowed. His hand reached out, trembling slightly. The fruit was warm, alive, and when his fingers touched it, he felt something whisper inside him. Not a voice, a presence. "Do people usually eat this?" he asked again. "No," she said honestly. "They fear it. They destroyed its origin world. They erased its name and made it forbidden." "Then why are you giving it to me?" "Because you asked," she said simply. "Not with your mouth. But here." She touched her chest. "I heard it." His scanner beeped. A red warning. Unknown organic material, psychic trace, unstable molecular core. Kaelen stared at the warning, then at her, then at the fruit. He took a breath and bit. At first, nothing, then light. Not from the fruit, from within. His mind cracked open, like a sky split by lightning. He saw stars falling, temples burning, a child alone beneath a glowing tree. He heard a voice call his name from beyond time. He dropped the fruit. The market returned. But it was quiet now, deeper, and she was still there. Her lips did not move, but her voice was inside him. "You opened the door." His breath caught. "You heard me?" he whispered. "Now you must listen." Kaelen stepped back. "What did you do to me?" "Nothing you didn't allow," she said gently. "The fruit connects. Mind to mind. Soul to soul." He wanted to run, but instead, he asked, "What happens now?" She looked past him, and he turned. In the shadows of the market, something tall and armored was watching. "They are coming," she said. "For you." "Why?" "Because the fruit chose you, and because you did not run." She stepped forward, took his hand, and pressed the half-eaten fruit back into his palm. "The bond has started," she whispered. "Now we must finish it, or everything ends." Then the sirens began. The sirens wailed across the marketplace like a dying animal, sharp and dissonant. Lights blinked red, sweeping across every surface, warning signs in a dozen languages flashing across the vendor stalls. Somewhere overhead, the comms repeated the alert. "Human violation detected. Class B species infraction. Initiate containment." Kaelen ran. His boots struck the metal floor with desperate rhythm, his breath ragged, fruit juice still sticky in his palm. The alien girl, Zarael, ran beside him, hood now pulled over her glowing face, her movements fluid and unnatural. She moved like water, like silence, like she had run from worse things before. They turned into a side alley, narrow and steaming, past flickering neon signs and vents that hissed with recycled gas. Behind them, footsteps. Not many, but deliberate. Heavy, coordinated. "What did you do to me?" Kaelen hissed between breaths. Zarael didn't answer with her mouth. Instead, her voice came inside his head, cool and steady. "You opened the bond. It cannot be undone now." He stopped short, grabbing her wrist. "Stop that," he said aloud. "Stop speaking in my head." She blinked. Then, softly, "I can't. We are linked now. Thoughts flow without choice. They just come." Kalen's heart pounded. He looked around. They were alone, for now. He leaned against a wall, trying to think past the static inside his skull. "What does it mean?" he asked. "Linked? Bonded? That fruit? It was just fruit." Zarael looked up at him. Her silver eyes glowed faintly beneath her hood. "When you took the fruit, your mind brushed mine. The bond is not a trick. It's a truth. First contact of the soul. I saw you. And now you see me." Kaelen stared at her, jaw clenched. "You saw something. What?" "Your curiosity, your loneliness, your want for something real." He flinched like she had struck him. "That's not fair. Truth rarely is." He took a shaky breath. "And now they're hunting us." She nodded. "Because the bond is forbidden. Because they fear what we could be." A sound echoed down the alley. Clack, 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 heavy boots, metal. Kaelen peeked around the corner. Armored figures, black suits with red visors, were moving through the market like wolves. Quiet, surgical, focused. They weren't here to arrest. They were here to erase. "They're close," he whispered. "We have to go deeper." "Where?" "Follow me." She moved to a rusted panel on the wall and pressed her palm to it. It glowed. A door hissed open, revealing a tunnel bathed in faint blue-green light. It smelled of wet stone and old secrets. Kaelen hesitated. "You expect me to follow you into a hidden alien tunnel?" She didn't speak, but suddenly, Kaelen felt something cold press against his chest. Fear. Not his. "Heron." He blinked, looked at her. "You're scared," he said, shocked. She nodded slowly. "But I will protect you. As long as the bond grows, you are not alone." More footsteps echoed behind them. Kaelen looked at the guards closing in, then at her. And he stepped into the tunnel. The door shut behind them. Darkness swallowed the alley. Only the hum of the tunnel lights remained, and the whisper of a connection that was no longer theoretical, no longer accidental. Inside the tunnel, Zarael walked ahead, her step steady. Kaelen followed, heart racing, mind burning. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To the place where truth is still alive." "That doesn't mean anything to me." "It will," she said. And as they disappeared deeper into the earth, Kaelen realized something terrifying. He could still feel her thoughts brushing against his. And he wasn't sure he wanted them to stop. The tunnel narrowed as they walked, its walls made of stone laced with glowing veins of bioluminescent moss. The air was colder now, damp and ancient, carrying a scent Kaelen couldn't place. Somewhere between soil and electricity. He kept close behind Zarael, his footsteps echoing faintly, his breath shallow, and his thoughts louder than ever. Because they weren't just his thoughts anymore. Every now and then, an image would flicker across his mind, brief, vivid, not his own. A small girl with glowing eyes. A hand reaching into darkness. A scream muffled underwater. He would blink, and they would vanish, like dream fragments he couldn't shake. "Stop," he muttered, voice sharp. Zarael paused, turning slightly. Her eyes glowed in the dim light. She didn't look surprised. "I told you," she said silently. "The bond flows without choice." "Then unplug it," Kaelen snapped, rubbing his temple. "I didn't sign up to have someone else living in my skull." Her expression didn't change, but her voice came softer this time. "You opened it. The fruit doesn't force, it answers. You asked for something real. It heard you." Kaelen looked away, jaw tight. "I didn't ask for this," he said aloud. "I wanted understanding, not this." Zarael stepped closer, slow, careful. "Do you feel me now?" He hesitated. "Yes," he whispered. "Then you already understand more than most." Kaelen swallowed, throat dry. "But what is this? What does it do?" Zarael looked upward toward the curved ceiling. "The bond connects minds. Yes, but also hearts. It reveals, reflects, remembers. That's why they fear it." A silence passed between them, though Kaelen now understood that even silence wasn't empty anymore. In that quiet, he felt her unease, her exhaustion, her hope. And somewhere beneath it all, her loneliness, sharp and old and deep. He exhaled. "How long have you been alone?" "Too long." "And this bond, it was outlawed because of what?" "Because it makes two minds into one, and those in power cannot control what they cannot separate." Kaelen ran a hand through his hair. "So now we're fugitives." Zarael nodded. "Not just fugitives. Evidence." Suddenly, a sound echoed behind them. Heavy, rhythmic. Metal boots on stone. Kaelen turned. "They found us." Zarael pressed her hand against the wall. A crack opened like a sliding iris, revealing a narrow crawl space lit with pulsing gold light. "Hurry," she said aloud for the first time in hours. They ducked inside just as the first shadow appeared at the tunnel's mouth. Tall, slow, unnatural. Its limbs moved like broken clockwork. Its face was hidden beneath a smooth metal plate. Its breath, if it even breathed, was silent. Kaelen shivered. "What was that?" Zarael didn't look back. "A silence bringer," she whispered. "Once they mark you, they never stop." Kaelen's voice lowered. "How do we fight it?" "We don't." "Then how do we survive?" "We move faster." They crawled through the tight tunnel, the walls glowing brighter with every step. The ground beneath them changed from stone to metal, old and rusted, etched with faint symbols that lit up faintly under Zarael's touch. "Where are we going now?" Kaelen asked. Zarael paused at a sealed door, her hand hovering over a panel. Beneath the temple ruins. "There is something here. Not a weapon." She pressed her hand to the panel. It pulsed. The door hissed open. A memory. Kaelen blinked. "A what?" "Come see." The room beyond was unlike anything Kaelen had ever seen. A circular chamber, walls smooth and seamless, glowing with soft blue light. Floating in the air were dozens of orbs, transparent, each one containing a flickering scene. People. Moments. Places that no longer existed. Kaelen stepped inside. "These are memories?" Zarael nodded. "Of those who bonded before us." Kaelen turned slowly, gazing at the orbs. "What happened to them?" "They were hunted. Erased." He looked at her, heart heavy. "Then why risk giving me the fruit?" Zarael's voice trembled, just slightly. "Because I want to change it. And I cannot do it alone." Suddenly she turned, eyes wide. "He's here." Kaelen didn't need to ask who. From the tunnel behind them came a new presence. A silence bringer stepped into the chamber. This one was taller, its armor cracked, its joints longer. And its presence, Kaelen could feel it in his chest, like pressure, like drowning. It didn't speak aloud. It pressed. Return to silence. Break the bond, or die. Zarael stepped forward, her hand reaching for Kaelen. "We don't run this time," she said. "Then what do we do?" "We connect." She pressed her forehead against his. Kaelen gasped. Light exploded behind his eyes. Her memories. Her birth. Her mother's voice. Fire. Screams. Loneliness. His memories. Earth. Stars. A childhood of silence. Then together they stood. Their aura began to glow, blue and gold. The silence bringer paused. The chamber responded. The orbs lit up. And then the silence bringer cracked, its armor splitting. Light poured from within. It collapsed to one knee. Kaelen's voice trembled. "Did we destroy it?" Zarael shook her head. "Number? We freed it." He looked at her, breathless. "What is happening to us?" She smiled, exhausted but radiant. "The bond is growing, and soon the stars will have to listen." The silence after the collapse of the silence bringer was unnatural, not peaceful, not safe, just waiting. Kaelen stood in the center of the memory chamber, breath caught halfway between awe and disbelief. Around him, the floating memory orbs dimmed, returning to a gentle pulse like sleeping stars. He turned slowly toward Zarael. She had fallen to one knee, one hand on the floor to steady herself. The glow that had surrounded her during the confrontation had faded, but its afterimage still clung faintly to her skin. Her silver eyes were glassy now, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the toll of what she had unleashed. Kaelen dropped beside her. "Zarael," he whispered, "are you all right?" She didn't answer at first. Then she looked up. "It's waking up," she said. Kaelen frowned. "What is?" She pressed a hand to her chest, just below her collarbone, where faint lines of light now pulsed beneath her skin. The glow was deep blue, tinged with gold, like the reflection of stars in deep water. "The core," she said softly. "The true source of the bond. It was never just in the fruit. It's been inside me, all this time." Kaelen stared at her, the implications settling like stone. "You're not just a messenger," he said slowly. "You're the message." Zarael managed a faint smile. "I was born to carry it, but I didn't know how deep it went. Until you." Kaelen helped her to her feet. Her legs shook, but they held. The metallic reinforcements Corin had installed back on the station shimmered as her steps found balance. She was evolving before his eyes, not just recovering, but becoming something new. A sound stirred behind them. Not metal, not footsteps, a hum. The room began to respond. Lines of light traced along the walls, symbols rising like breath from the stone. At the center of the floor, a new pattern emerged, a spiral, etched with layers of language Kaelen couldn't read, but which Zarael clearly understood. She stepped into it. The room darkened. Then, a voice. Software resonant. Not hers. Core integrity confirmed. Dual link recognized. Initiating reconfiguration. Kaelen looked around. "What's happening?" Zarael's voice echoed. Not in his ears, but in his mind. "I think it's giving us a choice." A panel rose from the floor. At its center, a small recess, a heart-shaped hollow, glowing faintly. Zarael reached into the pouch at her side and pulled out a crystalline shard. It pulsed in rhythm with her chest. "This is the seed," she said aloud now. "What remains of the original Starborn core. It's a memory engine, a living archive. It's been sleeping inside me since I was born." She looked at him, eyes searching. "If I place it here, everything changes." Kaelen stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means the bond becomes permanent. Not just between us, between species, between past and future. This place will awaken, and the core will speak again, through us." Kaelen hesitated. "And what happens to you?" Her voice wavered. I don't know. Maybe I become the ship. Maybe I disappear. Or maybe I become more me than I've ever been. Kaelen didn't hesitate. Then I'm doing it with you. Zarael blinked. Kaelen stepped into the circle beside her. Without a word, he reached up and placed his hand over hers. Together, they lowered the crystal into the core. Light erupted around them, not blinding but endless. Visions crashed through Kaelen's mind, worlds rising, civilizations falling, a star igniting from the breath of a dying god. Then, Zarael. Alone. Wandering. Remembering. He felt her every sorrow, every joy, every question. And then she felt his. Earth. His childhood. The ache of being invisible. The dream of finding something more. The bond solidified. Two lives wrapped into one thread of light. The chamber responded. Above them, the ceiling retracted, revealing a vertical shaft that stretched higher than Kaelen could see. Stars flickered at the top like eyes. The floor beneath them began to rise, lifting them towards something vast. I can feel them, Zarael whispered. Others, watching, waiting. The ones who tried before us. The ones who never made it. Kaelen closed his eyes. They're not alone now. They reached the top. Before them was a hall unlike anything they had seen. White stone walls twisted like braided ribbon, covered in markings that pulsed like breath. In the center of the space was a tree, tall, silent, glowing. Its roots spread across the floor like veins. From its branches, dozens of small crystal fruits hung, each one softly beating with light. The core tree, Zarael whispered. I thought it was destroyed. It's alive, Kaelen said. It's been waiting for someone to finish the bond. Zarael reached out. But before she could touch it, a tremor shook the hall. A voice, harsh, guttural, rang through the air. Unauthorized reactivation. Terminate bond. Purge sequence initiated. The far wall exploded. A new silence bringer stepped through. Larger. Armored. Burning with red light. Zarael turned, raising her hand. Kaelen, we don't have time. He nodded. What do we do? She looked at him. We finish it. She grabbed his hand, pulled him toward the core tree, and together they touched the trunk. The bond responded. Their bodies lifted into the air, surrounded by strands of light. The silence bringer lunged, but stopped mid-motion. A pulse erupted from the tree, freezing it in place. The lights wrapped tighter. Kaelen felt something inside him unlock. A memory not his. A future not written. He saw Zarael as a child, crying under starlight. And he saw himself, not alone. They landed. The core tree was glowing brighter than ever. Zarael looked at him. You made me believe I wasn't a mistake. Kaelen smiled, breathing hard. You made me feel seen. And together, two broken beings stood at the heart of a dying legacy. And rewrote it. The ascent chamber hummed softly as Kaelen and Zarael stepped down from the lifted platform, their steps light but cautious. The light of the core tree still glowed behind them, steady and calm, but the silence ahead was heavier now. Ancient. Alive. They had reached the inner sanctum. Unlike the previous chambers, this space was darker, lined with curved black walls veined with soft red light that pulsed like a distant heartbeat. Everything here felt older, more intentional. The air was warmer, thicker, as if they had stepped into the lungs of something that had been holding its breath for 1,000 years. Zarael stopped. Her eyes locked on a circular console embedded into the floor ahead, covered in fine dust. She approached slowly, almost reverently, and knelt before it. Kaelen stayed back, unsure. What is this? He asked quietly. Zarael didn't answer immediately. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, crystalline shard, translucent, emerald green, no larger than a fingertip. It pulsed in sync with her own chest. My inheritance, she whispered, the last echo of the one who made me. She inserted the shard into the console. The room shifted. Light exploded from the walls, red turning gold, dark giving way to vibrant geometry. Symbols rearranged themselves in spirals. The ceiling opened to reveal a sphere hovering above them, a memory core the size of a human head. It spun slowly, and then a voice, calm, deep, impossibly ancient, filled the room. "Zarael, you survived." Kaelen took a step forward. "Is that?" Zarael nodded. Her voice was thick. "My creator." The voice continued, not mechanical, but rich with emotion. "If you are hearing this, the bond has completed, the fruit has chosen, and the enemy still hunts." Images appeared in the air, holographic memories layered in soft light. Zarael as a child, held by a being with long fingers and glowing tattoos. Kaelen flinched as he realized he could feel the love in that image. Not see, feel. The voice resumed. "You were born not to fight, but to awaken. You carry the library, the echo, the truth of our kind. And to protect it, I gave you what they feared." Zarael stepped forward, her face pale. "They called me a mistake." The voice responded gently. "You were a mirror, a seed of change, and now that the bond has bloomed, you are no longer alone." The memory sphere pulsed. "For the core tree to rise, one guardian must be chosen, one human, one born not from technology but from wonder." Kaelen looked at Zarael. "That's why I saw things, felt your thoughts, why I was drawn." Zarael met his eyes. "Because you are not random. You are the why to my what." The room brightened further, and now a map appeared. An astral chart full of stars, lines, coordinates. At its center, a red blinking point. Starborn base, Ecliptica Veil. Kaelen pointed. "Is that where the others are?" Zarael nodded. "What remains of them?" The voice, almost wistful, said, "Go there. Finish what we began, and if they try to stop you, show them the bond. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder." The memory core dimmed. The voice fell silent. And Kaelen for a moment felt something strange. Hope. Zarael looked up at him, her eyes wet with memory. "He was the only one who ever believed in me." Kaelen smiled. "Then I guess we have something in common." She blinked at him, surprised. "I was the kid who never fit," he said, "who stared at the stars and asked why not me." You answered that." She stepped closer. "And you made me believe I wasn't broken." Kaelen reached up, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. "You're not broken. You're unfinished." And for the first time since they met, she let the bond open fully. No fear, no barriers. Kaelen gasped as her thoughts flowed into him. Images, emotions, fragments of her pain and beauty. She had seen so many worlds, lost so many names. And now, in him, she saw home. Suddenly the floor trembled. A new light flashed from the map. An alert. Movement detected near lunar edge. Multiple vessels. Interceptor class. Zarael's expression shifted. "They're coming." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "Then we need to go now." They turned back toward the rising platform, now lit in golden glow. As they stepped on, Kaelen turned to her. "This ship, can it fly?" Zarael grinned, fierce and luminous. "It was built for two." The platform lifted them into the heart of the starborn vessel, a chamber unlike anything Kaelen had ever seen. It was vast, dome-shaped, with living walls that shimmered and pulsed with soft blue-gold light. Dozens of glowing tendrils floated in the air like strands of silk, shifting gently, sensing them. At the center stood a throne of sorts, not a seat, but a convergence point, a fusion of organic design and crystalline architecture that radiated quiet power. Kaelen stepped forward, his boots echoing on the smooth floor. Beside him, Zarael walked with purpose. Something in her had changed. She no longer moved with the careful, unsure steps of someone being hunted. Now she walked like someone stepping into her role, like someone returning home. The voice from earlier, the Maker's voice, had gone silent. But the memory of it still echoed inside Kaelen. One guardian must be chosen, One human, one core bearer. He could feel the truth of it now, not as a theory, but as something real, living in his bones, humming under his skin. He looked at Zarael. What happens here? She turned to him, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. We align. Kaelen raised a brow. Is that your poetic way of saying something terrifying is about to happen? She smiled. It's not terrifying if we do it together. A soft hum rose from the floor beneath them. The throne responded to her voice, unfolding like petals. Tendrils extended outward, two of them reaching for Zarael, two for Kaelen. They hesitated mid-air, waiting. Zarael nodded once. They stepped forward. As soon as Kaelen's hand touched the tendril, the room filled with light. Not blinding, but total. Warm. Alive. The bond between him and Zarael snapped open like a current. He felt her pulse inside his own chest. Her thoughts brushed his. Her memories. Her fears. Her wonder. And she felt his. All the moments he had doubted himself. All the years spent wondering if he belonged in the stars. Every ache of being overlooked. All of it laid bare, and none of it judged. The throne glowed brighter. A voice, not the Maker's this time, but something older, rose from the chamber itself. Starborn Core initializing. Core Bearer and Guardian Prime recognized. Kaelen's breath caught. That's us, Zarael's voice was calm. Yes. The room shifted. A map bloomed across the dome. Stars, planets, networks of light and roots. But something darker hovered near the edge. A shadow? A fractured web of red? Zarael gestured. The conflict still spreads. Even now they fear what we represent. Kaelen's jaw clenched. Because they can't control us. Because we were never meant to be controlled. Suddenly, alarms rang out across the dome. A new light flared at the edge of the star map. Incoming vessels. Hostile designation. Kaelen's eyes snapped to Zarael. They followed us. She turned to the center of the chamber. Then they'll see us awaken. The throne responded to her presence. The tendrils wrapped gently around her wrists and waist, connecting her fully to the ship. She arched slightly as the interface fused. Kaelen felt her pain, sharp, brilliant, and then her clarity. Zarael, he called. She looked at him, and in that moment, she was radiant. I can see everything, she whispered. The whole system, every energy stream, every heartbeat in orbit. Kaelen stepped closer. What do you need? She extended a hand to him. You. He placed his hand in hers. The room exploded with light. Their combined presence surged through the vessel. Kaelen felt his body lift slightly, energy pouring through his spine. He didn't just see the ship, he was part of it. Every circuit, every relay. His heartbeat synced with its pulse. Zarael's voice was in his mind again, but this time it was no longer just thoughts, it was command, creation, power. The incoming vessels breached the upper atmosphere. Shields up, she said. Kaelen responded without thinking. Energy bloomed around the hull like liquid glass. Redirect their scans, jam weapons. No retaliation unless they strike. Her restraint stunned him. He expected rage. What he felt was control. The enemy vessels fired. He flinched, but the blasts scattered across the outer field. Useless. Now show them, she said. A transmission bloomed from their ship, visible, undeniable, a projection of the bond. Two figures, standing as one, surrounded by energy not born of war but of choice. A message pulsing with light. We are not your enemy, but we will not be erased. The vessels paused. Some powered down. Others fled. One remained, hovering, silent. And then its lights dimmed. A symbol appeared in space. A gesture of ancient respect. Zarael sighed. Her body relaxed. It's done, she said softly. They saw us. They didn't destroy us. Kaelen collapsed back into himself, breathless. We didn't destroy them either. She nodded. We changed the pattern. They stood there, side by side, as the ship settled into orbit. The lights dimmed to a calm pulse. The throne retracted, and the chamber whispered. Guardian and core bearer. Bond complete. Zarael looked at Kaelen, tears in her eyes. They said we were never supposed to exist, but look what we became. Kaelen took her hand. Number. Look what we're becoming. The starborn ship glided silently across the edge of Earth's orbit, cloaked in soft pulses of golden blue light. From afar, it looked like a comet, frozen mid-flight, its hull glowing gently like a sleeping creature. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Calmer, heavier, full of questions left hanging between breaths. Kaelen stood near the observation deck, eyes fixed on the distant curve of Earth. Cities glimmered faintly below, like old memories surfacing from a forgotten sea. He had seen that view 1,000 times in simulations, but never like this. Never while feeling like the sky finally had space for him in it. Behind him, Zarael was still interfaced with the ship's core. Tendrils of light wrapped around her arms and spine, not binding her, but sinking. She stood in perfect stillness, head bowed, eyes closed, as if listening to voices no one else could hear. Kaelen stepped closer, his voice low. You all right? Her eyes opened slowly. Yes, but it's not just me anymore, he tilted his head. The ship's still talking to you? No, she whispered, listening. The words settled between them. Zarael turned, the light fading from her body as the interface released her. She stepped forward, her movements smoother, more grounded. Her body no longer carried the weight of being hunted, of being broken. Now she moved like someone who had been chosen and had chosen back. Kaelen offered her a seat near the curved console. She took it. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of the ship around them. Zarael broke the silence. The ship was made for this. For us. Dual-link architecture. Two minds in sync. Not pilot and co-pilot. Balance. Kaelen nodded. A ship that only awakens if both halves say yes? She looked at him, expression unreadable. And we did. He exhaled, looking again at the planet below. So what now? Before she could answer, the interface pulsed. Incoming contact. Zarael leaned forward. One ship, council design, no weapons active. Kaelen's hands tightened. Observation or warning? Does it matter? She replied. They came. The communication line blinked once. A request. Zarael stared at it. They're asking what we are. Kaelen gave a dry smile. We still make them nervous. She looked at him. They expected us to become a weapon. And we became a mirror, he said quietly. Zarael didn't respond right away. Then she touched the console and spoke. This is Zarael, core bearer of the Starborn line. With me is Kaelen Varen, Guardian Prime. She paused, letting the titles settle into the static. We are not your enemy. We are not your experiment. We are not your mistake. She stood now, taller, her voice stronger. We are proof. That connection is not a threat. That trust between species is not corruption. That something broken can still give birth to light. Kaelen watched her. His heart caught somewhere between pride and awe. Zarael stepped forward, closer to the console. And I say this not as your data, not as your forgotten prototype, but as the one who survived everything you tried to erase. She closed her eyes for a breath. I am not a weapon. I am light. The transmission ended. Silence. For a moment they waited, tension thick as space outside. Then the council ship turned. Not toward them. Away. Kaelen blinked. They're leaving? Zarael watched the screen, her face unreadable. They heard. Another pulse from the ship. Starborn protocol complete. Primary link achieved. Kaelen chuckled under his breath. So, that's it? No, Zarael said. That's the beginning. Kaelen walked to the center of the room, where the control panel opened like a heart. A second set of tendrils reached toward him, less like machines now, more like memory. He touched them, and for a moment he felt the entire ship breathe. Every wall, every circuit, every stored memory, alive. Zarael joined him. The ship responded. Lights dimmed into stars. The entire room became a simulation of the galaxy, flickering constellations swirling around them. Kaelen turned to her. We could go anywhere. Zarael's voice was soft. We should go everywhere. He looked down at his hand in hers. And we do it together. She nodded. That's the only way it works. And so they stood, side by side, at the helm of a ship that was never meant for war, but for healing. A ship made not for command, but for connection. They had no banner, no army, just belief in each other, and the power of choosing not to be alone. The starborn ship drifted quietly above Earth's upper orbit, its silver-gold hull glinting like a lone ember floating in the dark. Inside, the light was gentle now, no longer pulsing with urgency, no longer bracing for battle. It breathed. Kaelen stood at the viewing deck, arms resting on the edge of the transparent wall. Below him, Earth shimmered like a fragile miracle. Oceans glowed in deep blue hues, clouds moved like slow breath, and the lights of distant cities flickered through the veil of atmosphere. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking up at the stars wondering where he belonged. He was already among them. Behind him, Zarael approached silently. Her presence had always been soft, but now there was something deeper, a stillness, a gravity. Not the weight of pain, the weight of peace. She stood beside him, her gaze following his. For a long moment, they just looked, said nothing. Then she spoke. They're watching, from every corner of the galaxy, listening, waiting to see what we do next. Kaelen nodded slowly. Let them. She glanced sideways. You aren't afraid anymore. I was never afraid of them, he said. I was afraid of not meaning anything, of being forgotten. She smiled faintly. You aren't forgotten anymore. They stood there, two lives once left behind, now orbiting the very world that once ignored them. Not as fugitives, not as threats, as proof. Kaelen turned to her. So what do we do now? We've survived. We've changed the rules. What's left? Zarael looked down at the Earth, then back up toward the stars. We rebuild the bridge. We bring the story back to those who lost it. We teach them that connection is not corruption, that empathy is not weakness. Kaelen raised a brow. And if they refuse to listen? She met his gaze, unwavering. Then we shine louder. A light rippled through the ship, calm, gentle, echoing her words. The core was no longer dormant. It was living memory, and it carried their bond in every system. 1,000 records were already streaming across deep space. Not weapon codes, not threats, but a story. The story of a girl born broken, of a boy born invisible, of a fruit once feared, of a choice made in an alley under failing neon, of a connection that refused to die. The story of two beings who were never meant to be more than remnants, but who chose to become something greater. Later that day, the starborn ship sent its final signal to the stars before entering quiet orbit. A single transmission. No weapons, no demands. Just a message. No one believed in us, but we believed in each other. Across the galaxy, people heard it. On mining colonies, in quiet stations, in broken cities and fading outposts. It was not a call to war, it was a call to remember. Zarael turned to Kaelen, her voice soft. Do you think they'll understand? Kaelen's hand found hers. Maybe not yet, but one day, someone will. Someone who's been forgotten. Someone who's still waiting to be seen. And they stayed like that, watching Earth spin slowly below as the stars around them grew brighter. What would you do if the only person who ever truly believed in you was someone the world had already discarded? Would you run from that connection or let it change everything? Drop a comment, because maybe this story wasn't about aliens. Maybe it was always about you.